I'm sharing 5 different techniques on how to elevate your layering stencils. I'm going to be using Pink Fresh Studios Delicate Floral Print Stamp and Coordinating Layering Stencil for all 5 of my techniques. Let's add some details with ink. So first I'm going to use my Misty to stamp my whole background image. This is coordinating with the layering stencils. Now, you do not need to have a coordinating stamp set to do any of these techniques. One technique, you would just have to change a little bit how you do it, but all 5 techniques work with any kind of layering stencil. So let's get these in place. I am going to start with my first stencil. We've got these beautiful flowers. I think there's 4 layering stencils in this pretty stamp and coordinating stencil set. So I'm going to make sure I get everything lined up. I'm using Distress Oxide inks for all of my images here, and I'm just going to use different color combinations. So for this first one, I'm going to be using Saltwater Taffy, Abandoned Coral, and Cracked Pistachio. So let's start with the Saltwater Taffy. I am going to just get all of my flowers ink blended. Now, a lot of layering stencils, when you layer them, gives you detailed areas adding to the flowers. I'm going to show you on this one how you can, outside of that other layering stencil, how you can add more detail. So I'm going to show you that in these certain different techniques. So this one here, I am not going to go to my next stencil, which has more detail. I am going to use the Abandoned Coral on a small detail brush, and I want to add some shading to the tips of all of my petals. You could also do it at the base, but this stencil already has a detail layer for the centers of your flowers. So I'm going to do the outside edges. So again, this technique will work with any type of layering stencil. Even if you don't have a detail stencil, like one of the layer stencils, it doesn't have a lot of detail, you can do detail yourself. So this just happens to be the stencil, layering stencil that I'm using, but just think about the ones that you have in your stash and how you can elevate it. So again, I'm just using a small detail blender brush. I'm using it from scrapbook.com, and I'm just adding this different color than the Saltwater Taffy to the tips. Now, if you wanted to use the same color, just go really, really light when you're laying down the color for the whole flower, and then come back in with a heavier hand to the detail areas that you want to add. But look at how gorgeous these flowers are already looking. So I'm just being careful just to the tips. Again, this is a really small brush, but this takes no talent whatsoever just to add it on there. But when we peel back this stencil, it looks so beautiful. This really doesn't take too much time. I don't know if necessarily this would be something you would want to do for mass producing, but even just a few little cards, just adding this little extra detail really changes up how these images look. And I love a layering stencil. I think they're so pretty and so fun, but you can still do your own different kind of detail to this. So let's finish these last few flowers. And you could do it with leaves, you could do it really with any of the images, but I think a lot of layering stencils tend to be flowers, but think about how you could do that with any other images. Okay, let's peel this back, and we're just going to see how beautiful it is. Now, I would say you don't even have to use the next piece to the layering stencil, but we're going to anyways. But look at how pretty that is. I think that is just so stunning. I love the 2 different colors together. Again, that's Saltwater Taffy and Abandoned Coral. We're going to use Cracked Pistachio for the leaves. So the next one is the leaves. I'm going to put that in place, and I am going to go light-handed with the Cracked Pistachio because there is another layering stencil for the leaves. It's going to add a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go pretty soft with this. But really the technique was using ink to add detail. So you're adding detail to the tips of those flowers just by adding a little bit of shading. That creates a different look. So even when we come back in with these other layering stencils, which we will do here in a minute, you'll see that the flower still has that extra something and it looks stunning. So I'm using a bigger blender brush, of course, for this so I can cover a bigger area. But like I said, light-handed, because I don't want them to be too dark, making sure I get the bases of some of those flowers. And I'm using the Waffle Flower Grip Mat. I am just using a little extra tape because I feel like my mat's not super sticky right now, so I think I need to clean that off. Now we're going to come in and add the details, the layering detail from the stencil itself. So I am going to be using Abandoned Coral for this, because this is going to give us some of that detail in the center. Using that same little detail blender brush. You could use a big one for this, but I already had this one dipped in this color, so I just decided to keep using that smaller one. I am not going to show putting all of these cards together because they're pretty simple, but I will show you the finished cards at the end. Let's finish adding. So you can see here on the detail stencil, there's detail in the center, and on the tips of some of the leaves, there's a little bit of a dark detail there. But it does not cover up all that work we just did. And again, if you don't even have a stencil that doesn't have too many layers, you can still add some interest to those images by doing this technique. Let's peel this up, and then we can do our last layering stencil, which is a little bit of detail to the leaves. But when we pull this up, you'll be able to see. And I'll show you all of these cards at the end as well. But you can still see that shading around the tip, and doesn't that just look stunning? This is one of my favorite techniques when I kind of ink blend anything. If I'm ink blending a die cut, if I'm using a stencil, if whatever it is, I like to add darker and lighter areas, even if I'm only using one color, because I think it makes a huge difference on your images, and it's not hard to do. You're going to do the same kind of ink blending. It's just whether you're going to go heavy or lighter on it. So, okay. Let's use texture paste to add some interest on our cards. I am using Picked Raspberry. I'm also going to use Wilted Violet. So I've already stamped it with my black ink, and I'm speeding this up so you don't have to watch all of the same stuff. But when I get to the technique itself, I will go a bit slower. I am using Rustic Wilderness for my leaves. Now, you could use the texture paste on the flowers or the leaves. I opted to do it on the flowers today. So here is that detailed layer. I'm coming in with the, Wilted Violet to add some of that pretty purple to that beautiful Picked Raspberry. So now I have all my layers done except for the last leaf layer. I have decided to use Cloud Whip, and I am going to use the Rustic Wilderness Re-Inker. I wanted it to have the same color, the paste have the same color. So I'm going to mix these two together. I already have my stencil on that's going to give me the detail for the leaves. So I'm not ink blending that, but now I'm going to bring in paste. So you could do this on any layer that you wanted to use the paste on, and it would be beautiful. So here's the second way to elevate your layering stencils. Super simple, super easy. You can customize the color with re-inkers. That is fantastic. So yeah, this is a great way to elevate your card. So let's peel this back. And again, I could have done it to the centers of the flowers, but this card I opted to just do it on the leaves. And you could do it on both. You just have to let it dry in between. And I think that would be beautiful as well. So let's take a look at this. You can see that detail on the leaves. And now you just have this little extra something. I think it's so, so pretty. Let's add some foil, you guys. So this card has Victorian Velvet and Seedless Preserves and Bundled Sage for the leaves. So I am going to add the foil to the centers of the flowers. I'm not going to do the leaves, but I'm going to do the first technique that we did. So, and of course I sped it up. So I started with the Victorian velvet, and then I'm adding seedless preserves to the tips of the flowers. This is going to be stunning. We're going to do some foiling. I'm using Tailored Expressions Glitter Grab. So this is a paste, and I am going to add it last. So let's finish stenciling everything. I've got the bundled sage for my leaves. So that's the one good thing about layering stencils. You can always come back. You don't have to do everything exactly in order. You can come back to it. So let's add the detail to the leaves, and then I will bring back in the detail layer to the flowers. We're going to use the Glitter Grab with a palette knife. I'm going to do a nice thin layer. Make sure it's not too thick. Keep it very thin. And you're going to want to let this dry completely. So it looks white, but it dries clear. So once you have this done, put it aside to dry. This is going to highlight all of those detail areas. This is the third way to elevate your card. And you guys, it looks so beautiful. So we're going to use the Mink machine with this, because this is not like glimmer hot foil, like hot foil plates. This is, you need something that the foil is going to adhere to, and it adheres to Glitter Grab. And I know there's other pastes out there that foil will adhere to. So you can see that it's white, but when it dries, it's going to be completely clear. So we need this completely dry. I have my carrier sheet. I'm turning my Mink machine on 5. Once that's ready, I'm also using Tailored Expressions Gold Shimmer Fun Foil. Now that that is dry and clear, I'm going to place this down, run this through the Mink machine. And when I pull it out, I want to make sure and let it cool down completely. And then I'm going to gently pull this back. And now we have foil added to our layering stencils. How beautiful is this? Oh, I just love this so, so much. Okay, let's use, I'm going to be using Olo markers, but let's use some alcohol ink markers to add detail. I started with Scattered Straw for my flowers, Bundled Sage for the leaves. I am not going to be using the second layering stencil on the flowers. I am only going to be using markers. So this works with any kind of layering stencil. You can leave out a layer, which is what I'm doing. I'm adding some dried marigold to the little berry looking pieces on this stencil, but I'm going to be using markers to color and add detail. So I have my Distress Oxide color down, my ink, and now let's bring in my marker. So I have OR 2.3 in my Olo marker. This is a darker orange. I'm going to add that darkest color to the center and to the base of each one of the flowers. You do not have to be someone who is proficient at coloring. This is so simple and easy. I'm just doing little flicking motions, and I'm keeping it pretty thin because you can always come back in and add more. You know, it's always hard, just like if you have too much eyeshadow on, it's harder to take off. It's easier to add more. It's the same thing here, same kind of scenario. But I like adding detail like this. I love alcohol ink markers. You could do this with colored pencils and things like that. You just have to, I haven't used colored pencils on Distress Oxide, so don't hold me to that. I'm not sure how that would go, but just think about your color medium and how you could do it. Let's finish this last big flower. Then I am going to use another color. I think this is OR 2.5. So this is, nope, this is the darker color. I'm sorry. This is 2.5, yes, and the other one was 2.3. So I'm adding a little bit of a darker area in the center. Then I'm coming in with YO 2.2. So this color matches more closely to the Scattered Straw. It's a little bit darker, which is what I want because I'm going to add more detail to the center and to the tips, the edges of the petals. So now I'm going to blend out that kind of orange color, that corally orange color that I put in there. And this may be hard to see on camera. I think you'll be able to see it better when I do the tips of the flowers, but I'm just blending like you normally would when you're coloring. Now I'm bringing that color in, and you can see on the tips of the leaves there. Because it's so close to the scattered straw, I don't need to blend it out. It's adding a nice little darker shadow area where I want it to be. So again, let's blend those pieces at the bottom, those areas, not pieces, and then add a little bit of detail to the tips of the leaves. And you can see the flowers on the top compared to the flowers on the bottom, and look at how pretty those are. Look at the detail difference. Look how soft it looks. Like you just have more interest, and this is not hard. This is so super simple, you guys. Let me just blend these guys down here at the bottom. And I just like to, you know, it's not particular. I'm just looking at the petals going, where do I think I need to have a little bit of that darker area, a little bit of shadow? Where do I want it to bring interest to? But look at how that flower turned out. It just looks so different. It doesn't look flat like the other images. Not that there's anything wrong with it, because they're beautiful, but just to add a little something extra and elevate it. We got this last little couple here, but super simple, so pretty. I just think this is a beautiful stamp and layering stencil set to begin with. Look at that up close. Look at the detail that we just added with marker on top of our Distress Oxide ink. So pretty. And we're coming up on our last technique, and this is the one that we might just have to alter a little bit if you don't have a stamp set. We're going to do some heat embossing. So I'm prepping my paper with an anti-static powder tool. I'm going to use Versamark clear embossing ink, and I'm going to be using gold embossing powder. So if you don't have a layering stencil that has a coordinating stamp, totally fine. You could just use the Versamark clear embossing ink on one of your layers. You would just take your ink pad to one of the layering stencils, make sure you ink that up really good, and then use the gold embossing powder that way. So it can be easily done. You just have to alternate how you're going to do that. So let me sprinkle on or dump on my gold embossing powder. I do have my heat tool on. That way it can be nice and hot. But now we're going to have this beautiful background. Let me clear up some of the areas that got some extra embossing powder that we do not want. You could do any color of embossing powder. It'd be beautiful, but I love gold, so I am going to go with gold. But like I said, if you don't have a stamp, just use your ink to your stencil on the paper. Just smush it down, ink it up really good, and then just spread your embossing powder on that. The final colors that I'm using are Spiced Marmalade and Candied Apple, and I'm also going to be using Rustic Wilderness for the leaves. So now you're just going to do your layering stencil exactly how you would normally do it, because you already have your embossing done. Except for if you didn't have a stamp, you could do it on any one of these levels, or one of these layers, not levels, especially the detail layering one. So either the second stencil for the flowers or the second stencil for the leaves, or both. You could do both, and that'd be beautiful too. So definitely, you know, just think about what layering stencils you have and how you could make any one of these techniques work. Let's add our detail here. Now I'm going to use the Candied Apple. I think this color turned out pretty. You know, this is red, but because you have that spiced marmalade in the background, it really turned a really nice orange. Super pretty. And then, like I said, I used Rustic Wilderness for the background. I did trim these panels down slightly smaller, really slightly smaller than an A2 size. And I am going to be using some sentiments. I'm using Simply Sentiments from Pink Fresh Studio, but look at that. And I did use a rag to lightly brush off or lightly wipe off the ink from the embossing powder. That's our first one with the detail ink. That's our second one with the paste. Then we have our foiled one. It's so pretty. Then we have the one with the markers. and then finally our gold embossing one. Thank you guys so very much. I hope that you enjoyed these projects and I hope you feel inspired.